Buckinghamshire, southeast accounts of corporal punishment give at school. Bounty Street, Secondary, Milton Keynes, Diane, B. 1940, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1951 to 1955. Barbara, B. 1940, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1951 to 1955. Bushfield, Middle, Milton Keynes. Debbie, B. 1965, hand across legs and slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teachers, 1974 to 1977. Danesfield, Primary, Marlow. Marianne, B. 1956, slipper across unspecified anatomy by female teacher in front of assembly, 1961 to 1967. Helen, B. 1956, slipper across unspecified anatomy by female teacher in front of assembly, 1961 to 1967. Great Marlow, Secondary, Marlow. Leslie, B. 1952, cane across bottom by male teacher, 1963 to 1967. Penny, B. 1962, slipper across bottom by male teacher, 1973 to 1978. Pauline, B. 1966, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1977 to 1982. Denise, B. 1969, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1980 to 1983. Hatter's Lane, Secondary, High Wycombe. Carol, B. 1949, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1960 to 1965. Anne, B. 1958, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1969 to 1974. Kerry, B. 1958, cane across hands by female teacher, 1969 to 1974. Suzanne, B. 1958, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1969 to 1974. Sharon, B. 1958, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1969 to 1974. Nicola, B. 1960, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1971 to 1976. Dawn, A. B. 1963, cane across hand by unnamed teacher, 1964 to 1979. Kate, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teachers, 1976 to 1981. Jane, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1976 to 1981. Sharon, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1976 to 1981. Debbie, B. 1965, cane across hand by unnamed teachers, 1976 to 1981. Amanda, B. 1966, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1977 to 1982. Jackie, B. 1967, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1979 to 1983. Dawn, B. B. 1969, cane across hands by female teachers, 1980 to 1985. Sue, B. 1969, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1980 to 1985. Cian, B. 1970, cane across hand by unnamed teachers, 1981 to 1986. Kerry, B. 1970, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1981 to 1986. Jane, B. 1970, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teachers, 1981 to 1986. Christine, B. 1971, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teachers, 1983 to 1987. Pembroke, Secondary, Flackwell Heath. Jenny, B. 1962, cane across bottom by male teacher, implied, 1973 to 1978. Jane, B. 1962, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1973 to 1978. Lynn, B. 1962, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teachers, 1973 to 1978. Colette, B. 1964, cane and slipper across unspecified anatomy by female teachers, 1975 to 1980. Helen, B. 1964, slipper across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1975 to 1980. Eileen, B. 1966, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1977 to 1982. Haley, B. 1968, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1979. Georgia, B. 1968, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1979. Priory, Primary, High Wycombe. Claire, B. 1968, cane across hand by male teacher and slipper across unspecified anatomy by female teacher and mouth washed out with soap, 1977. Quarrendon, Secondary, Aylesbury. Joan, B. 1947, cane across hand by female teacher, 1958 to 1962. Sheila, B. 1948, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1959 to 1963. Francis, B. 1948, cane across hand by male teacher, 1959 to 1963. Joe, B. 1948, slipper across bottom by male teacher, 1959 to 1963. Ross, B. 1953, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1964 to 1968. Mary, B. 1956, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1967 to 1971. Lynn, B. 1958, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1969 to 1974. Sue, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1976 to 1981. Radcliffe, secondary, Milton Keynes. Helen, B. 1956, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1967 to 1972. Sylvia, B. 1958, cane across hand by female teacher, 1969 to 1974. Beverly, B. 1963, cane across hand by female teacher, 1974 to 1979. Debbie, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by female and male teacher, 1977 to 1982. Elaine, B. 1965, cane across unspecified anatomy by female teacher, 1977 to 1981. St. Peter's, primary, Marlow. Doreen, B. 1947, cane across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1952 to 1958. Katie, B. 1960, cane and slipper across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teachers, 1965 to 1971. Tinker's Wood, primary, Downley. D. B. 1971, slipper across bottom by male teacher, 1981. Sarah, B. 1972, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1983. Joe, B. 1973, slipper across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1978 to 1984. Wendover, primary, Wendover Christine, B. 1947, slipper across bottom by male teacher, 1952 to 1958. Sally, B. 1953, cane cross unspecified anatomy and hand across bottom, over the knee, by male teachers, 1961 to 1964. Annie, B. 1953, hand across bottom by male teacher, over the knee, 1961 to 1964. Diana, B. 1953, cane across unspecified anatomy by male teacher, 1961 to 1968. Diane, B. 1953, hand slipper across bottom by male teacher, over the knee, 1960 to 1964. Wing, secondary, Wing. Nuala, B. 1968, cane across unspecified anatomy by unnamed teacher, 1979 to 1984.